What if I told you that there was a way to assess the driving force behind humanity at any point in time? You could look into the future and see what forces will be shaping us as a collective over the next 5, 10, 20, or 100 years. Well, it does turn out that something like this exists. And it's been known about by evolutionary astrologers and many of the people that have created the various spiritual systems and religious systems that we know today. So according to some researchers, what I'm going to share with you, is the allegorical underpinning of every great world religion. So are you ready to dive in and learn just how this great wheel of time, this dial, really works? So in today's video, we're going to discuss something that's so fundamentally important for both us as individuals and us as collectives. In fact, this is really like the foundational layer for all astrology, human design, and even for many of the great religions of the world, which I've talked about in a previous video. So this was something that's studied by Gnostic researchers and astrologers for millennia. However, it was rediscovered and I think improved by Ra Uru when he got the download for the human design system. So I don't think he realized exactly what he discovered because it was more of a transmission that came into him. But as a researcher of the great year cycle, the 26,000 year wobble of the earth, I immediately recognized what Ra had created and basically how it can help people in their day-to-day lives, also help people position themselves for where they really want to be in the future. And so this thing that I'm discussing is just called the Great Year Dial, and it basically accurately clocks the background frequency behind the collective program at different points in history. So if you'd like a detailed workshop on how this dial works, how it's set up, what are the mechanics behind it, you can find a replay to that workshop in the link below. But if not, stay tuned for some very, very exciting information about the change in background frequency that's happening at this time. In fact, there's more to it than this, because this information also shows you in the past what areas, what places in the world and times are affecting you most. It's almost like having a precise tool to measure this fine fabric of past life memories and ancestral memories and the whole like of that. I'm honestly surprised that more people are not discussing this because it has such a huge ramification for anyone that does collective healing work. Whether you work with the Akashic Records, ancestral healing, or mapping out the energetic evolution of the earth itself, this information will be of great interest to you. But there's something even more important than this. This device, this great year dial, can massively help accelerate our spiritual development without the painful lessons and dark nights of the soul, which I think is a desire for many individuals, especially now in 2024, when we're really in the thick of this global metamorphosis, this change into a new world, a new species. So be sure to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and get ready to learn the mechanics about this great year and the coming change so that you can accelerate your spiritual evolution and ensure that you're staying aligned with the forces that are going to serve you best, because you have access to a powerful archive of frequency data throughout time and into the future. Let's begin here with a brief introduction to what I call evolutionary cycles, so globally and personally. So it all starts with something called the wobble of the earth. This is a measurable physical phenomenon that takes about 26,000 years and change, a little bit less than that, to complete a rotation. I've covered this extensively in another video, so I'm not going to repeat how this happens exactly here. Instead, I want to explore the meaning of a cycle from an evolutionary perspective, specifically from a spiritual evolutionary perspective. So according to many esotericists, and this is also backed up by my own intuitive knowing that I've pretty much known since I was about 18 or 19 years old. And this also comes from channeled information such as the law of one. There's a real convergence between what the Gnostics have said, what I've known just naturally even before I encountered this information, and what I've also encountered in publications like the Law of One, which really has so many fundamental spiritual truths contained within it. So a single 26,000 year cycle is a term at spiritual school. Every single cycle provides the possibility of graduating to a higher order of spiritual embodiment. This is also called a harvest period. So as we move up the different ladders at the different densities of evolution, we go from a mineral or a virus into being a multi-celled organism, to being a mammal, to being a human being, and even beyond human being. Human being isn't very far up the ladder, to be honest, in the cosmic hierarchy. But there is this evolutionary process that happens over this longer period. Now, each of these cycles comes in a set of 3, and we happen to be in the third of this set of 3. So the beginning of this set started some 75,000 to 77,000 years ago, which is also coincident with the appearance of Homo sapiens. So at this time, we saw an inflection. If you are familiar with Darwin, there's a couple things he can't explain in the fossil record, certain inflections in the acceleration of evolution. And this was one of them. This is when we basically moved from being primates into much more intelligent creatures, much more intelligent human-like creatures, which was the Homo sapien, was where it really started. And there were other variations that were occurring at the time, but many of them didn't make the cut. They went extinct, and the Homo sapien was what survived. So the first cycle here went from about 77,000 years ago to about 51,000 years ago. However, very, very few actually went from being a very kind of primitive human into being, finishing sort of that cycle. Very, very, very few, if not none. And this cycle basically is the cycle of moving from free will, so moving from mammal, herd, limbic system, mentality into exercising free will to find love. So the next layer is understanding the nuances of universal love. That is what's called fourth density. So that's what we're transitioning into at this time. And every time there's an end of a cycle, that's the possibility for the human being to move out of the third density of free will into the fourth density of love. Now, the second cycle is where things got quite interesting. Roughly 50,000 years ago until about 25,000 years ago, there was another cycle that took place. And during this cycle, there were a few people that actually graduated and they made it into fourth density. Now, we hear these stories of advanced civilizations such as Atlantis and Lemuria, and this is very much what was happening around that time. Now, they weren't pure, but they were more evolved than the Homo sapiens that were inhabiting the planet. And actually, according to many researchers like Manly P. Hall, for instance, and even my own mentor, the Atlanteans actually were a global maritime civilization. And so they weren't interacting too much with the native population because they had to learn on their own how to exercise their free will. So the more evolved beings basically tried to stay out of it as much as possible. However, they had their own issues and their own problems, which you can read about and you can learn about yourself. That's not the point of this video. But needless to say, at the end of that second cycle, we're talking 26,000 years ago, basically, there was more people that graduated and made into fourth density than the first cycle. And so that began this current cycle that we're in, which is coming to a close fairly soon. Now, they say that at the end of the third cycle is where the most number of graduates occur. However, it's also a time of metamorphosis and great change where things go through a process of chemical transmutation. In other words, there's no semblance to the cycle that came before or the set of cycles that came before. So this is a big one. And this is why we hear things about a great awakening happening right now. It's the great awakening of the human learning to exercise free will into the life form that embodies universal love and is learning from the octave of universal love. And that's not the last octave, by the way. That's just the next one. And there's many of us here on this planet that are actually operating out of higher octaves than that to help guide this. This is a big, big mission that's happening right now. But the most humans in the world are moving from free will into love. And that's why you see so much of what you see. You see people that they just want to be billionaires, right? And they just want to spend money because that is lawful for learning through the school of free will. However, at some point it does come to an end. There's a need to evolve. There's a need to change. And that's what makes us different from mammals is that we have our own desires. We have our own creative desires that are like, what if? Let's just do that. Let's try that out. And as more evolved beings or more wise beings, we can see, well, some of those things aren't good. If you get too many yachts and race too many speedboats, eventually, you're going to find that materialism doesn't do it for you. Or you've traveled to every corner of the world, and now what? So we can see that there is life beyond just doing things for the sake of doing things. So another interesting thing, though, about this particular cycle is halfway through a cycle, the wobble of the Earth, the poles shift. And this happens every single cycle. But when the poles shift, so this is some 11,500 years ago, there's massive, massive changes happening in the Earth. And we have this in the geological record. Around 11,500 years ago, the sea levels were 120 meters lower. This is proven. I'm a geologist by trade. I have seen this. And basically, in a very short period of time, like a week, the sea levels rose massively. And so if we went with this idea that maybe there was advanced maritime civilizations, they could have been wiped out during a flood. And this coincides with the fact that they found underwater pyramids around the world, off the coast of China, off the coast of Miami and Bimini Road. There's a lot of unexplained things that happen. Even the Sphinx in Egypt, the weathering at the base of it suggests that the water was higher at some point. It was watermarked, even though it's in a desert right now. So there's lots of indications that something major happened around 11,500 years ago. This kind of reset everything, wipe the tables clean. But the good news is that the pre-existing knowledge was encoded, and it did actually survive this great flood. So the major deposits for this knowledge were the Nile Basin in Egypt, of course. There's pyramids to prove this. The Tibetan Plateau and the Nazca lines in Peru. So now you understand the bigger significance to the Great Cycle. It's time we took a look at the changes that occur within each 26,000-year cycle, because these are much more significant to a human lifespan than just some massive 26,000-year thing. So we've discussed pole shifts, evolutionary periods, and the fact that we're approaching the end of the third cycle. Now it's time to look closely at how a cycle is broken down in a meaningful way for human civilization, but also for our personal lives. And the first thing we need to do is choose a consistent datum or reference point to measure increments using the progression of a cycle. The datum has long been set at the constellation point, so the degrees of a particular constellation behind where the sun rises on the spring equinox. So the sun travels in an ecliptic 360-degree ring, and over the course of this 26,000-year period, it actually makes an entire migration. So this animation I'm showing here will give you a visual representation of this. So now that you have a datum, we need to know how to subdivide the cycle. Now, there's many ways to actually subdivide this cycle, and what I mean by that is there's many ways to split the one absolute whole into partitions to ascertain truth. So all divisions, so long as they're not distorted, are all partitions of the one unified truth. By using a different filter, we may initially get information or even an actual different system, but it all points back to the original truth if this information is sufficiently penetrated. So astrology uses what's called a base 12 subdivision for this great cycle based on the 12 signs of the zodiac. The tarot uses 21 subdivisions for the great wheel based on the 21 cards in the major arcana, which are actually linked with some pretty powerful numerology, the law of 3 and the law of 7. I'm not going to cover that in this video, but I will in the future, as this is a very important concept. And finally, human design, which is the latest player on the field, uses 64 subdivisions based on the 64 gates of the I Ching, which also represent the 64 codons of DNA. So all these systems use different subdivisions to describe the precession of a great year. At a surface level, they do not correlate with one another at all. And scholars and critics will spend all day arguing that one system is actually better than the other. It's simply not true. We must realize that each of these systems are all entry points into deeper wisdom. So if we choose one and we work with it sufficiently well, committedly, and sincerely, we'll eventually arrive and have a synchronistic epiphany as waves of life force enter and basically travel throughout the body. So this is the incredible power of a mentally stimulated embodiment that can arise from working with sacred geometry rooted in natural law. And that's why I do this, because this actually creates mental epiphany. Which is the same as people who do somatic practices and the same as people who are creatives and artists and basically access these deeper states of reverence through their art form. So for those who are more intellectually driven, this is a great way to trigger satori moments, to trigger the states of bliss and openness and basically create permanent shifts within us. So now we know how this great dial works and why it's of such significance, let's take a look at a practical example for the coming age that is less than 3 years away. So a change in the background frequency of such incredible significance because it is so dramatically opposed to the outgoing age. So before I go into this, I just want to say, if you want to understand the mechanics of what I'm talking about and all this, please see the link to the previous workshop in the description below. That is very important. That'll get you set up with all the right material to view this. If you already kind of understand a little bit about this, you've seen my other videos, you've taken the workshop, let's keep going, or you already are familiar with the Great Cycle, and you've maybe heard about this from the lock and key system in human design, then this will be of great interest to you. So this mechanism that I'm showing right here, it basically has 8 fixed themes that are activated by transient themes, and the transient themes shift as the sun migrates along this retrograde motion in the precession of the equinoxes. These locks come from, they actually come from the gates of the identity center. So in a way, as the sun migrates, it's like activating different facets of the Earth's identity center. So the Earth gets to know itself, which is a pretty cool theme. So that's where these themes come from. Now, if we look at each of these gates, you can see here, we have the 25, the 46, the 13, the 10, the 1, the 2, the 15, the 7. These are all gates from the identity center that act as sort of fixed reference points. So each of these gates has a different flavor or theme to them. And then what happens is you superimpose the theme of the passing one, which is on that sort of white rotating dial, or the dial that can rotate on the inside. So each of these has a different name, and we're going to start with gate 25, or the one on the far left, and we're going to go clockwise from there. So this one is the way, and it's really about how we feel along the way. It's like, where is that innocent desire and drive within us that pulls us during this time, during this era or epoch. Next is the one pointing to up and to the left, which is the witness. And this is basically where evolutionary history gets stored. This is like the archivist or the librarian. Then we have 10 at the top. This is the nature, and this is the programming for how people will behave at a certain point in time. So really, like, what kind of character will be evidenced in collective behavior. Up and to the right is the example, and this is basically the creative force that leads the cycle. So this is like where creativity is going during this time, where collectively people want to be creative, whether it's movements or styles or fads or trends. This is like a greater thing from which all those fads and trends emerge. Finally, to the right, we have the temple, and this is the physical housing. So this is the chalice that holds that innocent energy of the way. Bottom or down and to the right, we have the leader, and this is the logical leader for the homogenized masses. So this is like, what is the ruling consciousness going to be like during this time? What are politicians or kings, whatever? And you know what actually, that's the biggest shift we've had, is from kings, which is the last cycle, into, whether you believe it or not, democratized governments or elected officials. So that's a big shift. And in the future, it's going to shift again. And we're going to take a look at that a little bit today. Next up is the pattern, which basically is the rhythm of the environment. So how does sort of the external world get reinforced in the environment? And finally, the last one is the plan. So this is the way that the greater currents actually move us and where we find higher intelligence. So I hope that makes sense. And I'm going to just go now and I'm going to briefly talk about the outgoing and incoming frequencies. And I really dive into this in the workshop I was telling you about. And I will be diving into each of these in greater detail on their own videos. But I just want to introduce the concept to people now of all of these, and then we can unpack them in greater detail later. So this is like an overview. So the way, if we look at the way, and again, this describes the innocent feeling that kind of pulls us. It's like there's a real organic thing, like what tells, hippies to go dance in a field in the mud, and everybody just starts doing it. The 100 monkey effect. So the outgoing energy of the last cycle from 1615 to 2026 was given by gate 37, which is really about friendship. This is really the divine feminine in many ways. This is community, collective agreements. Let's take care of everyone. Let's nurture people. And you know what? We went from every man and woman for themselves. 90% of the world was living in poverty, serfs to some king or ruler or baron. And we went from that to basically socialized societies where, there's welfare checks and there's social programs and homeless shelters and, UNICEF and United Way. And, we're taking care or trying to take care of everybody. And in doing so, people stop thinking for themselves. In doing so, people end up saying, well, I can just trust that my best interest is at heart by the society that I live in. And this can be a mistake. And this is what we're seeing now, is that we can't really trust the food on our shelves. We can't trust governments during emergencies. We can't trust governments with an economy, even to take care of the environmental issues in the world. That's all breaking down. So if you buy into these, if you buy into the pharmaceutical industry, you're going to get hooked on drugs. You're going to probably end up with worse health and chronic reliance on chemicals that have pretty nasty side effects. Some of them are necessary at times, but we're seeing a decline in the quality of things that society is providing. And this is really evidenced in the amount of upheaval, rioting, and really dissatisfaction that's happening globally right now. And this is indicative of the change. And the incoming energy couldn't be more different than the Gate 37. The incoming energy it's a cool one, Gate 55. It's about abundance, but it's basically moving from listening to the herd to picking up. It's like an effect in the solar plexus where you pick up on the emotional wave and you know what to do. It's very, very emotionally driven, but it's also very intuitive. And it's really about finding the natural abundance in life because you're operating and responding to life on a emotional vibratory level. So it's kind of like the solar plexus. It works like a wave function where something comes in and it's basically there's highs and lows. This is a big part of the 55. It's being able to process and ascertain information simply by emotionally decoding it, which is something we have not been good at historically. But now people say, you hear this a lot. It's like, I'm not feeling it, or I'm totally feeling it. I'm totally resonating with it. This didn't happen. Nobody talked like this 100 years ago. This is a new phenomenon because of the incoming energy. So this is going to be the organic thing. It's going to be very individualistic of how people feel and how they're processing their emotions, which goes to say, you should have emotional maturity if you want to succeed in this coming era. You need to master your emotions so you can listen to them clearly. Next up and to the left, is the witness. And this is where evolutionary history gets stored. So the outgoing energy here is that of Gate 61, inner knowing, the mental pressure to explore the unknowable and make it known. And what do we see now in the last days? How is that crumbling now? Well, every truth ever known to mankind is available on the internet. What once was a $70,000 Scientology secret is basically on TikTok for the masses to see. But that's not all. All the teachings are there. They're all like scanned in PDFs on Scribe. Books that were like, you're sworn to secrecy. You couldn't show anyone on penalty of death. You can basically go and download for free and watch them when you're on the toilet or on the bus. It's amazing. At the same time, nobody will ever be able to read all of the voluminous truth out there. Information overload. Trying to get, relevant information for us off the internet is like trying to take a sip out of a fire hose. It's not possible. And then what is the shift, or what is the other side of that? Well, it's Gate 54. Gate 54 is ambition. And what does Gate 54 say? Well, Gate 54 says, I'm going to take what I want. I'm going to make it happen. That's the material. So you got to remember there's a spectrum here. There's going to be people who are very greedy. There's a possibility for that, at least. And there's a possibility that people will learn to access their potential that resides in their body, activate their body chemistry, their life force, their kundalini energy, and they'll be able to effectively create whatever they want in terms of knowledge. They'll be able to just know things, know what's right for them by raising their frequency. So instead of studying, instead of this mental approach, gate 61 is very mental. We now have gate 54, which is rooted in the root center. So this one is very felt sense. So as people honor themselves and they activate their latent life force potential, they will just know the truth they need. There's no more need for books and all of the other complexities of the previous outgoing cycle. Now, this is interesting because, so if we look at the nature, this tells us how people will behave. This is what the programming says about that. And in the previous cycle, the one we're just coming out of now, there was a real determination to focus on a task to achieve mastery. This is detail-oriented. This is lots and lots of details. Every time you buy something, there's this huge instruction manual. Like, we're living in such complicated worlds, really. Society, like, we got to understand our car. We got to understand all the things in the garage, the different household cleaners, the computer. We get a new thing for the computer. There's a user manual for it. You know, there's a lot of things that we need to know, a lot of things that we need to keep on top of. There's a lot of mental pressure that goes with that. And you can see how that works very closely with gate 61 is the need to know a lot of inner truths. And at some point, the complexity causes us to crumble. And that's where gate 34 comes in. And this is, you have to understand that there's going to be a potential for a spectrum in the future. On one end of the spectrum, we could potentially have a more Mad Max type of world where it is really the strongest and the fiercest that survive. You know, the other end of the spectrum, this could be the strength of individual character coming forward. And people are expressing themselves and doing heroic things. They're bending the weather and they're traveling through time, and all of these amazing abilities come forth with individuals. That is a real potential. We're seeing this huge awakening of, in the 1970s, the human potential movement was huge. ESP, learn to astral project. And now it's just it's becoming almost mainstream. You know, people nowadays are just basically waking up with yogic powers, and they're able to use it to make it look effortless. So one side of the spectrum is, basically being a bully and dominating other people. And the other side of the spectrum is heroically making things look effortless to surmount, what would be considered impossible by others. Moving on from there, we now have the example, and this is the creative force. This is basically where that thrust of energy is going to be heading during this cycle. And the outgoing energy here is continuity. So this is basically the creative force in the last cycle was about continuing the collective, ensuring that there's a continuity. And look at what happened with the population boom over the last 400 years. It went exponential. I mean, we had a couple 100 million people in the 17th century. At the turn of the 19th century, I think there was 1 billion people, and now we're at 10 billion. It's, a lot of the pressures and the stress on our ecosystems and social structures and the decline of quality of life is derived from overpopulation. There's too many people. And when there's too many people, we actually tend to close off and isolate. And we start to think weird things. And, corporations love it because they can just jack up their prices. They're like, oh, if there's more people, there's going to be more demand. If there's more demand, then they can fight amongst themselves. Survival of the richest, basically. And this is why things are collapsing. I see it every day. I see, places are doing well, charging more money, and the rich show up and the poor suffer. And that's not the way that we want to live collectively as a species, is it? Well, the incoming energy, it isn't going to be this creativity towards continuity and this competitive energy that goes with it. It's going to be about intuition. It's going to be about the intuitive awareness that allows one to get their needs met. And again, this is about sensing tones and vibrations. So it's important here that people have a degree of emotional mastery and that they're listening to bodily signals. This is something, the core concept of human design says to listen to your strategy and authority. And that's it. Everything else is just some subdivision of that, a derivative of that concept. But the concept itself is perfect for this incoming age. This incoming age is the age of the individual. And some people are going to really struggle with that when they're looking for answers outside of themselves. It's just not going to work. And astrology says we're entering the age of Aquarius, and Aquarius is this unique, quirky rebel. But your uniqueness, everything here, you have to have self-mastery, emotional mastery to know what authentic bodily signals feel like versus triggers versus unmet childhood needs. And that's the only thing you can really rely on. It's crazy. It's written right here. This is the amazing part of this. So now what's the housing like for this new incoming energy, the sleeping phoenix energy of gate 55? Well, this is interesting because the outgoing energy was work hard for the family, the community, and your organization in order to basically have a materially prosperous life. And the flip side of this is people ended up giving away all of their life force. They ended up building a society. This is the housing, building a society that they never had a say in, that they just basically got paid to build so they could have their little slice of comfort. Well, the incoming frequency is very, I don't want to say inconsiderate, but it's going to be like perfect in a way, but it's not going to be very fun for a lot of people's idea because it's going to be related to fertility. So this is the genetic imperative to reproduce and create something lasting. This is going to be challenged in the future. Like I just said in the last one, overpopulation is causing a lot of strain. If you look at it now, birth rates in the Western world have declined. There's fertility issues, all the microplastics in our bodies, not to mention the other chemicals in the body that is leading to a decrease in fertility. Testosterone levels dropping in men. They say 20-year-old men have the same testosterone levels as 70-year-old men 24 years ago. And this is going to affect our fertility too. Our desires are not to have children the same way they were. And so in a way, though, this isn't necessarily a tragedy. There's a silver lining. The silver lining is the overpopulation that we have, the strain on, social infrastructure, on the environment especially, and social implications of so many people in the world. It could basically just, the human population attenuates as fertility rates drop because it's nature's response. It's the change in the background frequency to say, okay, you guys had a little bit of a tick up in population. You got to explore what that looks like. And now let's bring you back to something that's more manageable in the long run. Of course, to people with a very religious perspective that believe in big families because their holy texts say so, they're going to be challenged by that. There's a lot of people in the world that are still religious, really religious, and they're having a lot of children. And if this background frequency causes a change in fertility, it's going to be very, very stressful for many. They're going to have to come to terms with this. But we can see that nature doesn't make mistakes, and there is potentially a silver lining here. It's not all bad. Quality over quantity. Next up is the leader. And the leader is very important because this is what we look to for leadership. So in the outgoing era, we were interested in gate 62. This is a very mental gate. This is a gate of somebody who has a keen eye for logical details. This is also somebody who really knows and has really studied and been educated. This is the scientists of the world. We made science our leaders in the last era because they were the one who knew the answers, and we just trusted that they knew them. Well, then they come to a point where we see that science doesn't actually have the real answers. I mean, look at the pandemic. All the models were wrong. Nobody had a clear perception of things. And in some cases, science is becoming dogmatic as well. And as a result of that, people are losing their faith in an objective investigation method. Well, the incoming energy, what we're going to look to for leadership, is really the gate of readiness. It's the pressure to begin a new cycle and not know where it leads. So we're going to be looking for people that are transparent and honest and can say, I don't know where this is going, but stand behind me because I'm going to do the best job. I'm going to begin this cycle with integrity and follow through it, integrity every moment. We're going to have some real challenges in the coming days. We're not going to know. This is uncharted territory in many ways. Even though this is a part of a cycle, this is not a cycle that's repeated anytime in anyone's memory. And this part of the cycle is really about improvisation and adaptation. So anybody that says they have a plan from the outset is probably dead wrong. They're convinced themselves it's true. They might not be lying, but they're wrong. And it's not going to lead to good results. Next up is the pattern, and this is the rhythm of the actual environment itself. So in the last cycle, it was really about expressing skills. It was getting good at things. This worked really well with the 9. Focus on things and then get good at them, master them, and express your skills. Show what you've learned and what you can do. The incoming energy is gate 20, and it really has to do with presentness. It's operating in the now with complete awareness. It's not about what you've done. It's not about, look what I've done, look at the life I've built and this that I've accomplished and the statue they're going to make. None of that. It's going to be what is happening right here, right now. The power of now. Eckhart Tolle's, thing that hit the masses and everybody saw it and they go, oh, yeah. It's really about the present moment. But no one can be present because we got these damn cell phones. Well, you wait. People will learn. They'll have to learn if they want to survive and they want to adapt. They want to evolve. They don't want things to get worse. They're going to have to master their emotions. They're going to have to listen to clear bodily signals, and they're going to have to be in the present moment. It's obvious. I think it's already going this way. Life has already shown us this. This is just a interesting correlation that there's this dial that has all this information built into it. So finally, the last one we're going to look at here is the plan, the way that the greater currents of life move us. So the outgoing energy is growth and expansion and the ability to bring closure to things so that a new one can begin. So in many ways, we've brought closure to a number of things, to child labor. We have brought closure to kings and tyrannical rulers as we move more into democratically elected or so-called democratically elected parties. But it has this essence to look back on the past to grow. This essence of, looking at what's happened before that we can learn from. And we've learned a lot. In fact, the last 400 years have been a process of us making mistakes and learning from the mistakes. Nuclear weapons. We made a big mistake there, and then we said collectively, okay, we're not going to drop those again. And then, of course, angry dictators threatened to drop them, and so far has not happened yet. But you can see we are learning, which is important. However, in the incoming era, the currents that will move us is courage. This is really like the warrior spirit to basically compete and be the best. So again, this could be like a Mad Max scenario where there's a competition for resources, or this could be the competing with ourselves to improve, the making ourselves better and better and better as individuals, not upgrades by gene splicing and, bionic add-ons and stuff like that. That could be a facet of it. There could be people that want to live forever and have their brains uploaded to the clouds. Again, there's a potential for a spectrum here. But on the other side of the spectrum is going to be people, instead of living as slaves, they're going to basically say, I'm free and I can be whoever I want to be. And I'm going to become that person and I'm going to improve myself until I do. So it can be a very beautiful thing. And you can see that there is this slant of focus on self during the coming cycle, whereas the previous cycle was really about the community, the greater good. I mean, that was the message during Corona. Don't do it for yourself. Do it for the entire collective. And as a result of that, we have seen what happens if we abide by a collective that no longer can provide us with suitable answers. When we do that, all of a sudden we suffer. But if we realize, actually, we can let go of all that, it's not so complicated. We just have to move with this new change in the background frequency, which basically just says, listen to yourself. In, a little bit more detail than that. So I hope you can see that this great dial is very powerful. It's a powerful tool for observing the forces that drive consciousness at any point in time. This is a function of how the Earth comes to know itself and imprints all the life on the planet with powerful genetic evolutionary forces. So if you'd like to know more about the mechanics of this dial and how it works to deepen your understanding of its significance, I do have a link to the workshop that I put on for this, where you can check it out and you can watch the workshop. It's fascinating. It's 2 days long, and it really dives down to the mechanics of this. It goes deeper into these interpretations as well for the incoming age and the implications it will have for all of us. Also have an upcoming workshop that you should definitely be a part of, because this one is going to be using this information to figure out your location, your home for the coming 2027, the new era that we're going into. So this is imprinted on the cosmos. Now this draws upon astrocartography and human design and the Great Cycle Dial to show you when and where various energies that are influencing your life came from, and also where your quote-unquote spiritual home is. And there's a lot of goodies, and there's a lot of very strong evidence to back this up that you will learn about in the workshop. It's, as always, pay what you want. If you've come out to any of my workshops before, you'll know that we get the same people coming out over and over again, because they find it very fascinating, and it's a very interesting way to work. We get to know each other. You get to interact with me. So I hope to see you at this workshop. It's fascinating. If you've ever wondered where in the world you should be and wanted some clarity around that, maybe you've had astrocartography readings, this is going to be much, much different, much more cool and exciting, and I'm going to be pulling out stuff that no one else is doing because I created it. So hope to see you there for that. So thank you very much for watching this video and for getting to know a little bit more about the incoming and outgoing frequencies. Be sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and do not and also you can just share this with whatever friends you want. This is completely open. I just want to get this information out there. So I will see you in the next video. Take care.